Alright, I have a somewhat wild take that is largely simply a matter of alliteration is fun. But, you know, you can discover stuff that way. So the self-consciousness section of Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit concludes with the triform sort of structural development of the three modes of essentially just like self-conscious individual like general perspective for like individually framed philosophy. These are like kind of the philosophies that the individual alone is capable of. This is the culmination of self-consciousness. This is what comes after the somewhat overly famous master-slave dialectic. The triform is there is Stoicism, Scepticism, and the unhappy consciousness. So I want to talk about this, except my like somewhat absurdist contention that Stalinism is the kind of the collectivized, like ideologized sort of conception of the unhappy consciousness, because Stoicism and Skepticism very much are individual frames of thought. But it's like worth noting how beyond this they do also function as like kind of ideologies, as like general like communicable worldviews that have therefore the capacity to function organizationally. Stoicism is like a philosophy which people communicate is like their philosophy, and you should be this, and this is like how to be wise. And then Skepticism is in its own way the same kind of thing, but then the unhappy consciousness, which is obviously not similarly a fairly vernacular word. The unhappy consciousness is Hegel's encapsulation of the individual philosophical perspective that has self-consciously overcome skepticism and in some sense refound a truer sense of Stoicism. But the unhappy consciousness, as he describes it, is like not quite capable of meta-individual form, because it's essentially just raw melancholy. But I want to contend that the version of the unhappy consciousness that is capable of this meta-individual form is Stalinism. So that's my take here. Okay, so first of all, to give the lay of the land, I want to just sort of speed run just how Hegel describes this triform in the phenomenology, like what I'm working off here. And so Stoicism is the first emergent like self-conscious like philosophy of the individual, and it emerges directly from the master-slave dialectic. And I don't really want to go into all of that, but basically the master-slave dialectic is this this struggle for survival between mutually exclusive wills. There's like a battle to the death kind of scenario, and the victor is the master, who's like materially dominant out of the outcome of the struggle, and then out of therefrom there emerges this like psychological structure of the master that experiences themselves as a master, and the slave that experiences themselves as a slave. But then there's the sort of the philosophical unraveling of each of those tendencies and the manner in which they each, in some sense, actually are the other within themselves. And there's that whole thing. But Stoicism emerges from all of this. Stoicism is essentially is first philosophy, not in like not in like the Aristotelian sense of like achieving metaphysical beginning proper. It's just like most basic bitch possible ever philosophy. Because Stoicism is essentially just the philosophy of just the luxurious like just nothing doers that are sitting around because they have slaves, and they therefore just spend their time pondering. So they are just radically simply pondering like the nature of being itself in the most abstract manner, in a way that is like utterly disconnected from material necessity, which is the actual like imminent exposure to being and discovery of it. So they come up with like the most abstract possible philosophy. And this is what Stoicism is. Stoicism is just like in the Marxist derogatory sense of metaphysical as just methodologically hypostatizing everything ever, and just like perceiving everything through the lens of these unchanging things, and like radically separated things. Stoicism is just like kind of straightforwardly is this, and Stoicism is so then I mean to treat it in good faith, what it is it's like it's the philosophy of kind of having the sense of the unchanging, the underlying like ultimate kind of truth of things. It's the sense of that is there, the sense that can be relied upon and aspired to, regardless of the ever-changing forms of actuality which may cause a loss of faith. So, I mean, very much so, Stoicism can be like a materially good force in conditions. It can be what is necessary to help someone to sort of overcome their own psychology or living conditions, and it can be a way of like learning. But nonetheless, yeah, it's like it is the most basic bitch possible philosophy. So then Scepticism emerges from Stoicism. Scepticism just is the negation of Stoicism, because what Scepticism is this sort of, again, individually bound philosophical outlook and very general kind of just all-encompassing framing that we don't know anything. It's like the complete inversion, that nothing can really be known, and that like the only certainty is uncertainty, and any certainty is itself precisely the very illusion that real knowledge is overcoming. Skepticism is just the enshrinement of doubt as the drive of discovery. And again, of course, there's something to this. This is not strictly stupid, and this genuinely is, in its own way, superior to Stoicism. It like materially emerges as overcoming Stoicism, because what Skepticism sees in Stoicism is that you have this notion that there is the absolute good or the real essence of this thing or whatever, but nonetheless you cannot like really like overwhelmingly clarify like indubitably the actual existence of this notion you have. Really, you are merely like projecting this ideal form onto reality. You just wish it were the case, and you're just making things appear such as it is the case. That's all you're doing. So skepticism is this in some sense very much legitimate insight toward Stoicism, that Stoicism is incapable of like really arriving at the ultimate like fact of the matter essence. It's incapable of truly considering actuality. But skepticism just does not get past this particular singular insight. It does not get past the mere method of deconstruction. And so skepticism as an individually bound philosophical framework is ultimately it's this kind of thinking and living that's like very proficient potentially at radically deconstructing and overcoming the problems that really do exist in kind of stoically, statically constructed edifices. It's essentially just the ultimate iconoclast, but it has no possibility of positive contribution. It in its very being, it cannot contribute a positive content to replace the Stoicist ideal. It simply does not have one. It in fact doesn't believe in the possibility of one at all ever. It simply is this endless negativity. So the unhappy consciousness is the third form, which emerges from like confronting, recognizing the failure intrinsic to skepticism, and thereby sort of rediscovering the essential like partial truth of Stoicism in a deeper form, which again is this sense that there is truth, that there is this underlying, unchanging sort of essence of the matter. But it no longer is merely Stoicism. It is Stoicism that has lived through becoming skepticism. So it doesn't simply fall for the illusion that that one can like adequately present some like static form of a given thing and be done with it and know it, and that is it. It has even more than the skeptic the radical deconstructive capacity to strip away what is insufficient about a given thing. But the unhappy consciousness is just the self-aware living embodiment of this contradiction of these two positions. It simply knows that there is this sort of ultimate like unchanging essence of a given thing. It knows that there is ultimately the correct like fact of the matter thing, which is precisely what can and must like restore faith despite changing appearances. But then it also has the sort of the material and methodological maturity to not fall for mere appearance in the way that Stoicism does and skepticism overcomes. So it has this sense that there is the unchanging, which is the only true, the only real, the absolute. But then it also, unlike Stoicism, does not recognize any appearance as at all really effectively presenting like some sort of insight into that. And so the unhappy consciousness is unhappy because it is the self-aware, intrinsically inescapable, lacking consciousness. It is the consciousness that knows itself to be at its uttermost core without the highest truth. Because it has this sense of the highest truth as the unchangeable, but it also has this sense that everything it can ever have access to is merely change. And so there's the disparity between the availability of change and the necessity of attaining the unchangeable, and this is impossible, and this is why the unhappy consciousness is unhappy. And now the escape from the unhappy consciousness is fascinating. The escape from the unhappy consciousness is the necessity of the arising figure of the priest. And what the priest is the mediator between worldly changing living being and the absolute, the unchangeable. There is this necessary social functional role of mediator between like worldly change and absolute truth. And by their existing this social framework, by their existing this like just agreed upon notion of the embodiment of this mediation, this is the escape from the unhappy consciousness, and that is where reason comes from. Reason in Hegel's phenomenology emerges from the philosophical encounter with the priest, and the unhappy consciousness becomes, in the most general sense, reason. And then that launches the entire reason chapter, which is very long, and I'm not going into all of that shit. But, so that's that triform. But then notice, as I said, Stoicism and Scepticism are like generally known actual like philosophies. Like they are, like in the colloquial sense, they are sort of niche movements of how one ought to live. Unhappy consciousness is not this. So where is that to be found, and why, or why is it the case that they are and it's not? So I want to sort of talk through that. My contention is that Stoicism is very much like Stoicism, as Hegel describes it, is very much. He's actually talking about that, like commonplace, well-known Stoicism, and Scepticism. He is talking about that precise, like very common skepticism. It's like skepticism is like the grand value of the scientific revolution and of like modern bourgeois culture. So then where's the unhappy consciousness? My contention is that just like Stoicism, Scepticism are these like actually existing cultural phenomena, unhappy consciousness does also exist in this way, like at this scale, at this level. It is this commonplace. But the form that takes is Stalinism. Stalinism is that. So now I want to talk about that same triform as like actually existing in ongoing politics in its worldly particular form. So Stoicism, Scepticism, unhappy consciousness, that's like the abstract analysis of these sort of positions as like emergent in the purest form from like the essence of psychology. And the worldly embodiment of these actually existing perspectives is in very much in the colloquial senses for all three. Just what is sort of obviously meant is like conservatism, liberalism, and Stalinism. So this means that that the conservative sort of element of modern bourgeois politics, the mainstream sense of right-wing cultural positions, that is precisely Stoicism. That is what's going on there. And then liberalism, the mainstream left wing, which is of course right wing, is in fact just skepticism precisely. And then the unhappy consciousness which overcomes this dichotomy, this antithesis, the position in worldly form that emerges from the failure of skepticism, which nonetheless had overcome in some sense conservatism, is Stalinism. That's the unhappy consciousness. So let me go through that a little bit, the same logic. Stoicism is just this sense that there are these unquestionable, unchanging particular essences and or values. And conservatism is wholly framed in this way. It is wholly driven in this way. It's a kind of brutally committed deontology of tradition, that any attempt to undercut the static actuality of the most obvious kind of values or senses, essentially sense certainty, the most imminently clear sort of elements of reality, those just are the most true elements of reality, and any kind of undermining of that, which is what skepticism can't help but do, is just all fucking evil and or stupid. And then so liberalism, in the colloquial sense of the mainstream fake left wing, the social progressivism, this is precisely skepticism. This is the logic of the runaway, all-encompassing notion of social constructs and overcoming tradition and deconstructing prejudice. This is the arch value of intersectionality. That it is just this radical negation, this endless pure negativity. And so, as I said of skepticism, the liberal is kind of more than adequate at sort of legitimately unveiling the structural flaws and inherent contradictoriness of really existing embodiments of any kind of attempts at deeper essences. But they just have nothing to contribute ultimately to replace. They just have this raw sense of the necessity of this methodology of deconstruction. That's what social progressivism is. That's why there's the notion that gender itself must be abolished and the family must be abolished and everything must be overcome. Tradition must be defeated. This is just ultimately stupid. This is ultimately wrong, precisely in the way that skepticism is ultimately wrong. That it has lost the capacity to have any kind of resonance with truth as truth, the notion of the absolute, regardless of if you are capable of articulating it effectively. So then the unhappy consciousness is the Stalinist. And I want to clarify here, this doesn't mean the Stalinist is in despair. Because again, the unhappy was a description of the inescapably self-aware lack. That's the source of the unhappiness. And now, to be fair, Hegel does sort of describe how the unhappy consciousness in his explication of the individual in particular as a representative is unhappy. He sort of explains just the melancholy armchair philosopher outcast. But I don't think that's like wholly essential to the matter. Like, so all that is essential to the unhappy consciousness is the inescapable self-awareness of this intrinsic foundational lack, which is the immanent sense of the contradiction between the necessity of achieving resonance with the ultimate absolute truth and the availability through living being of mere appearance, of constantly changing, constantly not enough partial embodiments of this whole truth. So I contend that this is essentially the life of the Stalinist, that this is essentially the drive of the Stalinist golden center. The Stalinist golden center is like the political sort of general sense of like the real response to the vacuous left-right dynamic. It's the discovery of the true left wing, that is the objectively progressive left wing, the revolutionary force. The discovery of the true left wing is the Stalinist golden path, where you have the appearance of the left wing at any particular moment. There's the contemporary vacuous left-right distinction, which is this purely cultural, purely like surface level dichotomy of values. And then rather than like simply be like the most left wing on that false spectrum, the Stalinist like has a sense for the living, necessarily unveiling motion of what is actually at play, driving these values and these ideas and these aspirations. So the Stalinist golden path, the golden center, is essentially the centrism of rejecting both the radical left and radical right, but not merely in like the most boring possible like neutral centrist sense of like they both have a point, but rather in the sense of they both are so utterly wrong that that spectrum like between these poles is just not a matter of actually working on discovering the truth of the matter. What the Stalinist is just instead kind of the mundane common sense of the future superimposed upon the illusory present false spectrum. So this is kind of like, in the loosest kind of like aesthetical manner, the meaning of Stalinist in the, like I said, in a loose sense. Like in a sense, I do mean Stalinist, like not like Marxist-Leninist, which is just all the Stalinists kind of generally meant. It was like a derogatory term for Marxist-Leninist. But Stalinism, treating it as its own thing in this sense, treating it basically just as like a looser, a more colloquial sort of sense of one sort of working through what is ultimately the Marxist-Leninist position. Well, that which can only be like really clarified by Marxism-Leninism, but one does not necessarily like embody the full great scientific discovery of the matter. So Stalinism is the overcoming of the skepticism of liberalism and the rediscovery of the good elements of the Stoicism of conservatism. Stalinism is the sense that there are elements that are within kind of commonsensical, like ancient notions. There are elements that are legitimate, and there are values, and there are just concepts and traditions that ought to be in some sense upheld, but it does not fall for the ignorance of conservatism, wherein they are simply just the fools of the corrupt structure that is like clearly just malignly utilizing these embodied concepts to selfish gain. So it's not merely conservatism, but it does recognize the value of conservatism. And it is clearly not liberalism, but it does inherit the value of liberalism. And the value of liberalism is, again, just this radical negativity, this sense of the necessary deconstruction of the old, this sense of the necessity of building something distinct. That's the good part, sort of very loosely, of social progressivism, is just the progressivism. But Stalinism has this sense, but grounds it in, like the unhappy consciousness, an awareness of the ultimate, actual truth of the matter. But then also, Stalinist does contain, in a self-aware sense, in this unique way, this lack. The Stalinist is the self-aware, self-conscious living embodiment of the contradiction of conservatism and liberalism. Because the Stalinist sort of recognizes the legitimacy of aspiring toward the old, and the necessity of grounding oneself in being oriented by the ultimate truth of things, which is the whole sort of gut punch heart of conservatism. But then it also the Stalinist contains the necessity coming from progressivism, from liberalism, from the radical negativity. Stalinism inherits basically the good elements of bourgeois revolution as a historical, progressive era, because liberalism is just the ideology of bourgeois revolution, and again, this is the ideology of the scientific revolution, the generation of industrial technology. So the Stalinist has this methodological necessity of deconstructing the mere stasis of forms, but alongside this deeper, ineffable sense of the absolute, which is beyond these mere changing forms. Stalinist has this lack, and the lack is the essential thing. So then, what about the sort of the essence of the experience of the unhappy consciousness, the sort of the proof of the matter of what, how the unhappy consciousness acts, and the thereby emergence of the priest. So for the Stalinist as unhappy consciousness, this does occur. This is how it goes. But to sort of point that out, how it goes is the Stalinist as living embodiment of the contradiction of conservatism and liberalism, as the embodiment of the overcoming of this contradiction and the awareness of this. The Stalinist is propelled, is driven by a self-awareness of this lack, which is the appearance, as pointed out by the liberal, of the ineptitude of the contemporarily existing structures and edifices and ideas. The ultra-left deviationist, occasionally very effectively highlights legitimate problems. Like they may very well point to something that is genuinely insufficient. But the trouble is that the Stalinist knows this. The Stalinist already knew this. And the Stalinist integrates this within and alongside a comprehension of the rational kernel of the conservative, which is the necessity of upholding this kind of longer term, like, civilizational heart. So the Stalinist has the lack of the unhappy consciousness. The lack is, there is this contradiction between the false appearance of reality, and yet the necessity of grounding oneself according to the ultimate, the unquestionable, which is the value of the conservative. So for the liberal, as skeptic, nothing is unquestionable. Nothing. They, in fact, hold this as a sign of honor. They treat it as like a mark of intellectualism, to be capable of perceiving that nothing is beyond question. But this just leads to justifying degeneracy. So the Stalinist is the embodiment of the lack, of the contradiction between these dichotomous poles of individual philosophy. And as with the unhappy consciousness in the abstract form of the individually analyzed philosophy, the only possible escape from this actually, like, existing contradiction of being that the Stalinist embodies, the only escape is through the arrival of the mediator, the actual, like, living embodiment of the mediation between the ultimate, like, really unquestionable, like, whole truth, and the actually perceivable, actually, like, interactable, appearing, like, false, partial sort of things. So this is what the priest was for the unhappy consciousness. This is how the priest is the necessary figure which allows for the escape of the unhappy consciousness as just like lost melancholy into reason proper, built on the basis of the unhappy consciousness's insight into that contradiction. The mediator is essential. So for the Stalinist, the mediator is the masses. The masses themselves, the sort of collective body of the people, of, like, be it the nation or the civilization, of just that within which the Stalinist lives and is dealing with actively. The masses of people as like an emergent collective singular will that is more than the mere sum, like the mere, like, unanimous agreement of all of their consciousnesses. It is rather the collectively emergent intelligence of the masses in general. The masses are the priest. The masses are the mediator that allow for the capacity to work from the sober awareness of the falsity of all appearance, but nonetheless work through being in connection with the ultimate really existing whole, the ultimate absolute that undergirds and overdetermines at scale all of these false appearances. This is what the priest allows the unhappy consciousness to do, and this is what the masses precisely allow the Stalinist to do. The Stalinist is caught in this contradiction, in this from the individual level, inescapable contradiction. And the escape is to work through the mediator of the masses, which reveal the sense of the absolute, but in this way that has to be worked upon and formed into like the systematic, finalized like ideas and methodology of the Stalinist, by like putting them through its lens. And so, as with the emergence from unhappy consciousness, that is the dawn of a reason itself. That is the emergence for Hegel's phenomenology of reason proper. As where reason comes from is the sort of final form of individual philosophy encountering the social role of mediator that allows it to like move outside of itself and then back into itself, and therefore work through the unity that is beneath itself. That's the dawn of reason. And so at the collective level, the Stalinist, because remember what I was saying is that Stalinism is like the collectively like commonsensical like philosophy version of like how Stoicism and Scepticism already do operate that way. So then at the collective level, the existence of the masses as mediator and the function of the Stalinist as capable of recognizing the necessity of this mediator and therefore working through that mediator, this is where from there comes collective reason. This is where from one can arrive at like the real essence of a reason, but not bound to the individual form. And so now to go into it a little, what is reason for Hegel? What is reason as demonstrated in the phenomenology by all these varying forms? So reason, Hegel explains, is reason is the thinking life of when you know that what you are is like representative of the whole of reality. Reason is this sense of being in touch with necessity, essentially. But it is kind of like that, in a sense, in mere form. It is that, like it is the insight, essentially, like that there is logos. So it's the insight that there is necessity, that there is like rational explanation for actuality, ultimately. Reason is this sense. Reason is knowing that what you are is like an embodiment of an ultimately rational process. It's just that there is an explanation. You know there's an explanation. You don't necessarily know the explanation, but you know there is one. So reason in the phenomenology is it's in a sense it's like the post-philosophical, or like the post-speculative state of mind. It's like the emergent dominance of pragmatism, in a way where all of the individual forms, the individual like kinds of consciousnesses that from its emergence define the progression, like the development of humanity, of spirit, they're all defined in this this kind of tunnel visioning way, where one legitimately like finds fulfillment and like lives well to an extent through the through the act of working some subject matter, because one is just being reason, and one can be fulfilled in that way. Now, of course, there's the higher level of spirit that comes later, and spirit is essentially is reason that has like. But what he says is that it's like raised the fact that it is like all reality to truth. So it is the way in which reason is this sense of that there is an explanation of everything. You know there is. You feel like you are within rational being. Spirit kind of has the explanation. That's actually the raised level. That's how it's higher. And of course there might be a communication barrier. There's going to be the problem of how to like when one is like self-consciously spirit as a higher form than reason, how one can get that across and effectively work with someone who is not on that level of self-consciousness. That's like a whole thing, but nonetheless spirit like for itself is at this higher level where it like actually like has the explanation. But anyway, but spirit is also, by having it, by being that way, is sort of necessarily it has attained unto this kind of post-egoic state of mind somewhat. It even as like governing a particular singular agency, like being embodied within a singular person, it really like no longer is in the sense that the word is used in any way like individualist, whereas reason is. So reason is kind of the final individual. Because as an individual, if you sort of reach a higher frame of mind than any kind of reason, I mean, you are just like cementing and concretizing in your very essence of what is yourself for yourself, that you are not yourself distinct from those beyond yourself. You are very much self-consciously reaching there. But anyway, so reason is like the final individual. Okay? Reason is the final individual. It is the submission to like the fact of the matter that there is the rational totality, whether or not you have sufficient sort of insight into that rational totality with regard to the particular contexts currently considered. That's reason. Reason is that there is an explanation, there's a logos, that the world is rational, you know this. So I mentioned collective reason. That sounds a bit funky potentially. And what this is, as I said, this is in the same sort of developmental emergence kind of way. This is only possible through the work of the Stalinists, through the know-how to operate with the masses as mediator. That's like the precondition of this in any way existing, or at the very least in any way like being perceivable or being cognizable for humanity. So what collective reason is materialist dialectics, basically. So what I'm saying here is that materialist dialectics, as in Marx's like general worldview and like method and like means of practice, of cognizable practice, of scientifically comprehended and applied practice. That is precisely what I mean, like Marxism, what it means, materialist dialectics, dialectical materialism. This is what I'm calling collective reason. This is this higher form of reason. Because, like I said, reason was like the final individual. So dialectical materialism, this collective reason, is like the highest form of collective consciousness. Of consciousness that that operates as a socially emergent and organizational force. And so, as I said, the masses are the mediator that allows this to, like for us, exist. So obviously I'm saying there, you know, Marx was a Stalinist. Marx was working that way already, and this is clearly true. I mean, you read the fucking Communist Manifesto. He's not saying, like, here's communism, I figured out. He's saying, like, communism's fucking everywhere. All the people are talking about communism. So let me help clarify what that is that they are already talking about. This was always the nature of the thing. But then, let me talk a little more about that sort of, what's going on there, this mediator thing. So, for Marxism, what Marxism is, or like what it does that like viscerally declares it to you to be distinct from any other kind of like thought or method, is that it has this very tangible sense of material forces which operate at a higher level than individual consciousness can think, basically. Like operating without the framework of dialectical materialism, you cannot really think like capital itself, or like anything like that, but like a material force like this. Because what this material force is it's something that is absolutely material. That is to say, what we are talking about here is wholly a worldly matter. Is absolutely something something which in its essence and its being and everything that makes it up and everything that needs to be described about it is of this world, is not dependent upon in its being, is not dependent upon anything abstract of any kind, anything disconnected from like experiential reality of any kind. So a material force is thus, but nonetheless it is simultaneously utterly beyond individual experience. It is not simply a matter of it's right there, you can see it, you know what it is. It's like an emergent phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that operates wholly materially, but at like a level that is like beneath and beyond like mere individual perspective. And this distinguishes it from like objects, like the subject matter of the mechanical materialist, the undialectical materialist. So like classically, there was like the idealist and the materialist position. This is what like Marx and Engels referred to prior to them, where like the idealist like manner of thinking is that you just have this pure concept, this pure virtual perfected idea of some kind, and that's what there is that exists. And appearing reality is like a false impression of that. And the materialist position was like, no, there are just objects, there are things, there is what we can see and touch and know. That's like the source of the empirical state of mind. That was like prior to Marx and Engels, and the whole philosophy essentially is just a matter of idealism, the dominance of idealism, until like essentially the modern period, essentially the bourgeois period, and the dawn of the empiricists and the bourgeois philosophers, going back to like fucking Hume or whatever, or I mean really going back to like, I don't know, Hobbes and shit. The materialist position sort of took over as a stranglehold on the modern bourgeois mind, and that's the philosophy of the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution. But that's limited to what we can know. Like, either you do just know, you just see a rock, that's what's real, or like with a little bit of education, just sort of pointing out features that then are easily known, you can know. But it's still just a matter of like, that's like a traffic system. That's why they're moving in that way. But it's like essential components are like mere objects that are clearly apparent. So the distinction between idealism and mechanical materialism, so there's essentially the distinction between idealism and materialism classically was that idealism, unlike materialism, was capable of dialectics, was capable of not merely being mechanical. There was mechanical idealism, and there was dialectical idealism, and there was merely mechanical materialism. This distinction was not made because it was essentially just like there's idealism, there's materialism. Idealism is clearly better because they come up better insights, and what they're doing is they're being more dialectical. And now dialectical idealism was a matter of, instead of just simply you have this pure thought, it was like, here's my thought, but then based on that thought, I will go and assess the legitimacy of my projection of this pure, perfected being, based on like assessing what's going on in reality with appearances, with the understanding that material appearance is a mere false, partial revelation of the pure ideal, but then it allows me to sort of get a sense of where I'm wrong and where I'm right based on assessing prediction and appearance. And then I go back to the ideal and I figure out, okay, I think actually this is what I had wrong about the ideal. And that's the dialectic of idealism. And materialism just didn't have this because it just regarded ideas as fancy. It was just a matter of just like, that's a rock. So what Marx brought to the table was dialectical materialism, which is, here is raw experience, and then from raw experience, not like objects as being, because we're not like at like any kind of determinate essence yet. It's just, here is raw reality. And then from raw reality, this is the actual state of things as they are. And then from that, we draw and develop and produce ideas. We develop like this sort of methodological, procedural, intermediate step of ideas, of purified concepts. We take concepts out of our experience of reality, and then using those concepts in the idealist manner, we go to reality and sort of develop them like in the same way, assessing, well, what's really true about this idea or wrong about this idea, and let me perfect this idea based on what's happening in reality. But the essential thing is that the idea itself was generated not from, this is how it ought to be, like logically, raw, consistently, abstractly, but like, this is to my best description what is happening. And then you like sort of rigorously systematize and define properly that idea of what is happening, and you apply it, and then that's what you work on and perfect. So you're doing the dialectical idealist thing. Okay? So this is the dialectical materialist thing, which is new. The mechanical materialist doesn't do this. And like literally I'm saying, like this, the scientific revolution, like great thinkers don't fucking do this. That sounds a little silly potentially, but this is basically true. And it's true because when you realize what is a material force, as dialectical materialism can reveal it. So material force is like capital or whatever. It's not just like the traffic system, the rock. It's like it's just there. Capital is this different kind of material thing. Because to really know capital, it's not something you just sense at all. It's not something you just perceive, really. Like sense is just like raw experiential intake. Perceive is like you have some prior conception of the essence of a thing and you like see it as an object. So like you sense hot, you see car. A material force like capital, you don't even really perceive, and like that's sort of the limit of mechanical materialism, is like highly developed perception, like a rigorous definition of some kind of object that you perceive. With capital, it's not really like that. Instead, the material force dialectical materialism can reveal is it's a process which is so just rigorously and immanently and endlessly like dialectical in its very being, and it's so systematic that it's impossible to have any like particular whole perception of it. It's impossible to isolate it as object. It literally only exists at this emergent kind of collective level. This is something that you can't perceive. This is something that, in order to know, the only way you can know it is to, you need the mediator, which is what I was getting at. Because the material forces of this kind for dialectical materialism essentially are the absolute. They are the unchangeable, in the sense of the unhappy consciousness knowing that that is there and that is something one must aspire toward, like knowing. So the dialectical materialist, the Stalinist, has this notion of the material force that exists, and it is not something he can merely perceive at all. It is not something he can simply like learn to recognize straightforwardly through like varying experience, because that's false appearance. Instead, he needs the mediator. What the mediator, the masses, do is same for what the priest did for the unhappy consciousness. It like allows the Stalinist to, like, practically speaking, like methodologically in the application of his notions, to like move out of himself into something external to himself and to his prejudices, and then move back into himself as informed by them. That's what the priest did for the unhappy consciousness. That was the escape from the unhappiness, the self-aware lack, was that you can like procedurally, methodologically move beyond yourself and return to yourself as informed by that other than yourself. And only in that way can you grasp like the real, like the more than your mere illusions and prejudices. And the Stalinist does this with the masses. The masses are the mediator, because like for the unhappy consciousness, the priest just sort of like, as socially imbibed, just like has this like imminent, immediate like connection to the unchangeable, to God. The Stalinist realizes that the masses are what have this direct connection to material forces, because, like I said, you can't. They're not a material force is not an object. It's not something you just sense, and the masses are not just like a large number of individuals accumulated together, agreeing or not agreeing on some description of objects. The masses are like a collective force, like a singular emergent will. And only this will, only this collective will, is capable of really discerning and developing an assessment of and a practice like with or against material forces. And the Stalinist is the one who knows this. The Stalinist is the one who acts according to this. So that's kind of my whole idea. So then all of that together, right, is like the Stoicism, Scepticism, unhappy consciousness triform. It's the triform in self-consciousness of the a description of like the possible appearances and the historical developmental kind of progression of the forms of like individually like defined and emergent speculative philosophy. They're like the three kinds of a singular person assessing how to know truth, how to know reality, and how to act accordingly. And they're a classic like Trinity formula triform. There's the immediate like utterly consistent and abstractly limited Stoicism, and then there's the like utterly embodied like worldly bounded Skepticism, and then there's there's the dialectical unified unhappy consciousness, which contains the real contradiction of the prior forms in itself as its essence. And this triform is kind of like the height of dialectical idealism's insight. Like it takes Hegel to sort of lay this out easily. Like it takes his phenomenology of spirit, his like developmental exposition, to sort of clearly display these forms in this structure. And like, remember, of course, the phenomenology of spirit is what it is it's just like this is the total like happening of all of philosophy prior to my philosophy, which is the final philosophy. That's like what he's doing in the phenomenology. It's like not part of his philosophy. It's just like super speed, like all encompassing as a singular motion. Just this is what all of philosophy ever before has done. So it takes doing that, like writing that book, to reveal this triform, which is kind of the height of dialectical idealism. And then I think there is this mirror image of that triform in the materialist realm, in the collectively emergent sort of ideological realm of the triform of conservatism, liberalism, and Stalinism, where they do the same thing, and in each case there's the capstone moment, there's the apotheosis kind of escape from ideology into reason. And for the materialist triform, this is the Stalinist practical revelation of dialectical materialism, of collective reason. and it takes this collective reason to operate in the way that reason does for the individual, as like the known connection to the fact that there's an explanation, the sense that there is a logos. The world is rational. So, like, for the individual, you can attain unto unhappy consciousness. You have sort of like the height of speculative insight, and then you can raise yourself unto reason, and you can have this sense that you are within rational being, and you'll know how to think and live in such a way that even if you don't know what's going on, that is the case. But it takes collective reason as a thing to exist, to sort of get the insight into how it actually is the case that our world, at least our modern world, our like post-industrialized, globalized kind of monoculturized world, how it is that is actually rational. Like, if in order for you to place yourself within the context of history and still rationally articulate with all like relevant context and data how it is genuinely the case that the world is rational, you need to have this absolute of material forces, these kind of laws of history that Marx is always trying to describe to you is like the ultimate sort of thing of what's going on. But the only way to have any kind of sense of that, the Stalinist like learns necessarily, is to work through the mediation of the collective will. And the Stoicists, the conservative, like, cannot possibly think this and cannot possibly recognize legitimacy in this, because they are merely bound to pure abstract ideals that are just like, so they'll just think that the collective will are just like the madness of crowds. Like, all these people agreeing together can't possibly have a good sense of like the family or something. And the skeptic can't possibly agree with this and can't possibly think this, because they'll just think that like this collective will is just, they'll actually think it's not concrete. They'll think it's like you're just like making it up. It's just not a determinate enough of a thing. This law you're referring to, these forces you're referring to, and this collective will you're referring to, it's not an object. I can't see it. What the fuck are you talking about? And this will be the liberal disparaging throwaway toward the Stalinist. But the Stalinist is the one who can have this sense that there are these laws of history, there are these forces in material being that are deeper than, that are beyond any kind of mechanical assessment of wholly apparent objects. So the Stalinist like operates within and has a sense of collective reason. They have a sense that the world is rational, that there is an explanation, and the manner in which it's true that there is an explanation, and they can work fulfillingly toward revealing this sort of partial aspect of that explanation of the whole. is through working in a particular context on revealing the collectively revealed raw reality and developing procedural concepts through that and applying them. So yeah, anyway, that's what the Stalinist is doing. That's all of that shit. So this is a little like a mirror image of Triform that I think reveals a lot of things in one big go.